Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Zero Shot Learning, the podcast about the reality of developing with AI, straight from the people actually doing the work. I'm Nancy Wang, and I'm the Chief Technology Officer at 1Password. Normally, I co host this show with Dave Tagare, who's a Senior Director and Head of Engineering for Gemini Enterprise and Business at Google. Dave couldn't make it today, so joining me as guest co host is Richard Liu, who leads AI products and development at Anthropic. Our guest for this episode is Jeff Wang, the former CEO of Windsurf and now president of New Enterprise at Cognition. Jeff is one of the definitive architects of AI engineering, leading what has become one of the premier AI coding platforms at Devon Desktop. Now, a quick bit of housekeeping for our listeners. Throughout this episode, you're going to hear from Jeff, Richard, and me refer to a company called Windsurf. That is because between the day we recorded this conversation and the day it came out, the company underwent a major rebranding. Windsurf is now referred to as Devon Desktop. So when you hear us say Windsurf or Devon Desktop, know that they are one and the same. In this episode, Jeff pulls back the curtain on how Devon came to be, how Windsurf and Cognition joined forces, and the fascinating architecture behind multi-agent swarms. But what I love most about this chat is that we didn't just talk about the wins, we actually dove deep into failure modes. We all know that you learn the most when things break, and Jeff was incredibly candid about the failure situations his platform faces and how his engineering team is working to overcome them. You can also learn more about his candor and from his candor than any success story. So let's lock in. This is Zero Shot Learning. We have a special guest co-host with us today. His name is Richard Liu, and he leads API products at Anthropic. We also have Jeff Wang, who is the CEO of Windsurf at Cognition. Jeff, thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Let's have some fun together.
And actually, I wanted to kind of parse that a little bit. So, Windsurf, Cognition, Devon, can you unpack that for our audience?
Yeah, it's kind of a combination of a couple products now, but we kind of try to sell it now as one platform. Engineers have a lot of ways they want to interact with code and write code. With Windsurf, you have the IDE, but now it's with Windsurf 2.0, it's more like an agent command center. You're like moving agents around. We also have a CLI as well. So Claude Code came out with this form factor, and people are kind of like using it because they don't have to modify the files as much anymore with the models getting better. And then now Devon is this kind of like remote agent, this agent that runs in the cloud, has all the dependencies and access to the relevant data that you need to do the task. And you could scale that across the whole company.
That's amazing. And I'm sure you have some thoughts as well, Richard. What do API products at Anthropic mean?
Yeah, so I've seen a couple of different parts of the stack. Previously was at Google with Gemini and looked at a lot of the infrastructure layers and APIs. Now, really, I'm working on the API layer at Anthropic. And so that's looking at the security, the enterprise readiness, and the identity stack around how our APIs are served to customers. And really, it's about all of the harnesses and unhobbling the core model that makes a lot of the possibilities of things like agents and our agents SDK and cloud managed agents possible. And so, super excited to be part of this conversation.
So I noticed, you started talking about Devon and you mentioned Claude Managed Agents or CMA. Where do these agents run?
I mean, they're running on VMs that are in the cloud. Sometimes our customers request to be deployed in their VPC as well. But you have with like Windsurf 2.0, you can run agents locally as well. So you have the option to work locally or in the cloud. But what we've really discovered is cloud agents are like the future. If you have an agent that has access to everything it needs to be productive, and you roll it out to your whole company, and you could scale it to like thousands of agents. Like we're seeing a lot of people using dozens of agents at once in parallel. This is like the new world that we're living in.
I think what we saw at Anthropic, at least, was previously it was mostly Cloud Code, which is you're running the model and these capabilities directly on your laptop. And then we evolved and introduced the Agents SDK, which allows you to bring your own infrastructure and be able to run these agents there. And I think the next evolution, which is where we're seeing a lot of the direction go, is a truly serverless solution where a lot of this is hosted in the cloud, in CSPs like Amazon or Google. and it's fully managed. So the customer just ships their configuration for the agent, and we handle the rest.
And in fact, actually, it was really interesting to note, as the security provider amongst us three, is we've also had to evolve as well because, where we've traditionally been, 1Password is we have a local vault, which sits on your laptop or your mobile device and stores credentials there. But certainly as agents, especially like Devin and cloud, managed agents are now running in the cloud, maybe even on sandboxes, to your point, you said VMs. We've also had to extend our credential broker capabilities into sandboxes, into cloud environments. So maybe on that note, Jeff, walk us through actually an example of a task that is really well suited for cloud agents like Devin that might not be for an IDE assistant.
And it's really funny. All this has happened because the models have gotten really good at very long running tests. I like to joke. I have a son who's 4.5 years old, and all of a sudden he's able to do a lot of things by himself now. And it was kind of like the Opus 4.5, 4.5 moment, where it crossed the threshold where it can actually do so many different things now. But the problem is the agent doesn't have access to some of the necessary like data or access to write code or modify code as well. And basically, if you think about Devin, it is this agent that has access to everything to be really productive. So a good example, and by the way, because it's in a VM, you could verify the code is working as well. So if you, let's say you're doing a code-based migration or a code upgrade, there's a way to have a before and after state. You know the code is running beforehand, hopefully, you have like unit tests or kind of success criteria that shows the code is running well. And then when you do this new version, like let's say you do a COBOL migration or a Java upgrade, even in the completed state, Devin can actually run the actual application on the VM
Nice.
and do like some UI testing, have a list of things you could check. You could run Windows environments now. You can run Android environments. So say you have an Android app
Mm.
and you want to test if it's working. You can actually just deploy that in Devin and it could actually test it for you.
Oh, wow.
And then it comes back to the engineer and it's like, here's a report of why we think this is working.
Yeah.
We also give you a PR, of course. We still want some auditability and human in the loop. But that is like the way that a lot of people work now is you hand off tasks to an agent. It comes back with all this proof that it works,
Wow.
and you just approve it.
That's amazing. In fact, actually, I mean, Maya's just lit up because, as 1Password, we're deployed across all of the client apps and desktops. And so we have Windows, we have Android, obviously Mac, iOS. And so, and of course, we're also in the browser as well across many different flavors. And so for us, testing is always a very manual process, right? And so the ability to essentially set up a test environment and actually come back to you with validation that, hey, this actually branch or this version is actually working, like, I mean, that's a huge unlock.
It actually
Yeah.
there's a thing happening with event-driven agents as well. So let's say there's a bug report for your Android app for 1Password. You ask everybody in the development team, hey, who wants to replicate this? Nobody's going to raise their hand. I can tell you from experience, nobody really wants to be the person to replicate bugs. But Devin's not going to complain. You can give it to Devin. The ticket comes in. Devin will see if it is actually a bug,
Mm.
and then it could also automatically fix it too. So this whole like
Wow.
there's a whole paradigm shift right now. Event-driven agents are roughly 40% of all of the workload right now, which is probably a shocking stat for people that are actually initiating these agents, like having dozens of agents, and it's still not the majority, or it is a little slight majority of all the work, right? So this is crazy stuff. Like the whole world of like how we're interacting with code and how we fix problems and how we want to do net new stuff. Yeah, it's a very different world we were just like 6 months ago, even.
What are some specific types of examples that you would say that have been particularly valuable for these kind of event-driven tasks? So things that come to mind are like long-running tool migrations or database migrations, like the issue to PR, being able to go from the initial bug report all the way to a pull request. Like, what are the most common or valuable type of scenarios or events that you've really seen empower your customers?
You go into any engineering organization, you don't want to take away the things that they want to do. You want to take away the things that people don't want to do. And one of the biggest ones is vulnerabilities. So vulnerabilities come, you might have like 24 hours to address it, you might have like a week to address it. Nobody is like raising their hand either to drop what they're doing and fix the vulnerability. But for event-driven devons and agents, this is like one of the biggest use cases. Like we have some like large banks that have like 70% of all their vulnerabilities are just automatically being fixed by Devon now. And they might have a backlog of vulnerabilities that you just throw the agents at, and it will just go start fixing them one by one as well. And I can tell you, nobody wants to take that work. They don't want to drop what they're doing to fix vulnerabilities. Another good example is like CI/CD. Like you want to merge the code in, there's some checks that happen, and it breaks. nobody wants it to break. Everyone wants to see the end result, right? So then the cool thing is Devin can automatically be set to fix those as well. So these are some examples. It's really the toil, the things that people don't want to drop and work on that this is really good for the event-driven use cases.
And so from your seat, right, we're talking a lot about, of course, coding type of tasks for these cloud agents. I imagine, in your day to day, you do a lot more than just code. And so how does a cloud agent or remote agent help you in your seat? What does your day to day look like with this?
Yeah, I mean, I'm spending a lot of my time, as you know, like traveling the world, trying to open up new regions and offices and really understand what the customer pain is and trying to meet with the customers. So a lot of that is kind of like go to market if you think about it. And I could ask Devin, well, first of all, you can plug Devin into a lot of things that are productive. So one of them is like a Salesforce connection. Another one could be we work with a company called Exa that had like indexes the web and you could
Oh,
like
yeah, the
search,
search
right?
company. Yeah.
Yeah, and like you can actually pull like LinkedIn profiles and like you can ask Devin like, hey, I'm gonna go to like Google Cloud Next. I want to meet with who's there, and like, how about you just find out who's there, get their email, write me some ghost notes. I'm gonna send this to my reps, and then that's all. That's all I said, and it just like gets it done. I could also connect like an email, like MCP server or
Yeah.
something, but I haven't. I don't want to get that far.
Yeah.
I still want like the reps to like really think about is it worth the
Yeah.
time to meet this person or not. But that's a good example. Another one is actually since it has access to the database, like customer usage, billing, you can actually ask a lot of questions of like, I'm about to go into this meeting with this customer. What is their usage like? And like traditionally, maybe you have to like look at a dashboard and filter, but it is just something that I just like am naturally asking agents about now. I just ask like, hey, what's going on with this customer? And it will probably be like, hey, usage is dropping. You probably want to fix this, right? But this is like just how all of us behave at the company. Like, probably we should use more dashboards, but a lot of the behavior now is just like asking agents to like inform you of the latest, and it actually just creates you a net new dashboard a lot of the times too.
Wow.
I think this is pretty interesting. I've been hearing stats recently that for a typical developer's workflow, about like anywhere from 8 to 15% of their time during the day is actual hands-on keyboard coding work. And the rest is exactly what you described, like all kinds of other kinds of coordination, research, and meeting with people. Like how do you think about like how to improve some of these additional tasks? And some of the things that are coming up that are pretty interesting are like knowledge graphs or understanding like how the relationships between people happen, like for the remainder of the 80-90% of the time.
There's like kind of two trends forming. Like right now, the I guess the root of all this is because it takes so long to get one of these like prompts done. It could take hours to get done, and that means people are sending like another task, and eventually soon you have like a dozen different boxes on your screen like going at once. What is probably going to happen is you move up a layer of abstraction. So instead of like the granular features you want the agent to develop, you might say, hey, we need to revamp the superset above. Here's all the features we want to have, or like we want to like get more revenue. We need $100 million more revenue this month. So how do I do that, right? So, but that's a little maybe a couple layer of abstractions above. So you're telling this agent some high level thing, and it actually breaks it down for you, the work it needs to do, and then it starts doing the work. So, like, we've been implementing features to create sub agents for Devin to spin up other Devins, and that's kind of how we're preparing for when people start transitioning to this next abstraction layer. And it could be to the point where someone needs to like start a company and says like, "Hey, I want to start a company. I want it to be worth 1 billion." All right, Devin, let's go. Right? That's probably a couple years down, but we are like kind of moving towards that state.
And so maybe coming back to like, what it takes to actually build a Devon, right? Maybe let's do a deeper dive. And so if you think about a coding agent, right, there's a couple primitives that are pretty, common. Things like evals or, shared memory or things like tool calls or configs. So like what goes into, obviously as much as you can share, like building Devon, and, where do you think teams typically underinvest in deploying or rolling out a Devon?
So at the very base layer, and this is actually a problem, is you do need like a code base attached because you do need something for Devin to actually modify. And again, this could be like an onboarding issue where like, oh, I have to have a code base. Like, what if I just want to use the like kind of like a chatbot instead, right?
Yeah.
So we are working on that too. I just want to make a caveat there.
Thank you. I was
Um,
gonna say you actually took out my feature request before, because
um,
for go-to-market teams, right, they may not have a code base attached.
that's
Yeah.
exactly it. That's right. And like once you have a code base attached, Then there's other tools that might be useful. Like maybe it's your Datadog and you want to investigate something that broke. Maybe it's your usage data, so you connect like like a database, like BigQuery or Redshift or whatever, right? Once you have enough things connected that you think are useful for Devin, maybe the one thing that most people don't invest in the beginning is creating a playbook. So a playbook is a set of tasks that you can get a repeatable outcome from. So let's say you want to do like a data migration. You can actually put in the playbook, here's database A, here's database B, here's the outcomes, here's where you need to check to like investigate or you just basically create your success criteria as well. And then what you want is like a very repeatable outcome or a very deliberate outcome. And as long as you have agents that know what they're supposed to do, the harness and the models are really smart now to go and use the available tools to get it done. And the cool thing about Devin is it can keep like using trial and error. And like if it gets it wrong the first time, it actually learns. So like I know there's like a lot of research going to like continual learning, and you don't make the same mistake twice. We actually have shared knowledge in the organization too. So if Devin messes up, you can correct it, and then Devin learns from that, and it goes into the knowledge base as well. So everybody will be able to benefit from that learning.
Let's maybe for our audience kind of come up with like two different mental models, which is how does it work in Windsurf and how does it work in Devon? So let's start with context. Like how does each system decide that they have enough to start working on?
Yeah, so with Windsor, we actually used to build a local context. This is mainly for security reasons because some companies they never want their code to be exposed anywhere, and we had this like complex configuration where the moment you open the code base, we would generate embeddings immediately, create a local vector DB. We've actually since like stopped doing that because it took a lot of resources, and now we actually have Devin, which when you plug in the code base, it generates an index remotely, and that it also creates a whole documentation of your code base as well. But the agent can use that to really deeply understand the code base. But on Windsurf side, you might have like just a random directory you open up, and that doesn't have again a remote vector DB. So instead, we have a lot of other tools. We do have like grep where you can like do keyword matching. You could also have the agentic search as well. So agentic search is like you can use a smaller model, look for the string, and go crawl through files very quickly. And we actually use very like complex infra for that too. For example, we do use like Cerebras to
Oh,
do
nice.
a lot of the agentic search, and it flies through like you could
Oh,
have like
so
millions of
fast.
lines of code,
So
and it
fast.
could
Yeah.
still fly through. So both that works on both Windsurf and Devon. But then because Windsurf doesn't have all of the like indexing potentially, if you're opening a random directory, that's how it works.
Let's talk about common failure scenarios. Like, what's some of the most common failure modes, or like either like editing the wrong tools or files that you've seen, like with Devon, that typically are most objected or customers are worried about?
Probably the most common is if it doesn't know the specific output it's supposed to get, right? So you have to be like very clear what you're asking of the agent and what does success look like. So if you give a very ambiguous task and it doesn't know what you want, it might fail because it doesn't know what you want, right? And to avoid this, there's two things. One is like building this knowledge base of if it keeps failing, you'll probably keep creating knowledge of not to do that. But the second is actually creating more playbooks. So then if you create a playbook, again, it's like a very specific list of instructions to accomplish the task. That is another way to avoid those common failure modes.
And, harkening back to something that you said previously, which is when you correct Devin, it actually understands, it learns, it stores it somewhere in its memory, and then comes back and learns, your preferences for the next time and does the task. Um, I guess the question there is, how do you actually do that without having to turn back into prompt engineering?
So we actually, and Anthropic has actually discovered this too, which is like you separate the actual trajectory, like the whole conversation, with the kind of analysis of what's going on in the conversation. So as the conversation is going for like many hours, there's another like kind of agent that's actually examining the whole thing, and then retrieving the right context when necessary. It could be code base, it could be knowledge, it could be like the available MCP servers, but all of it has to do with how much information you give up front and how much you plan with the agent. But yeah, Anthropic has discovered this too. Like having multiple kind of like systems working together to avoid some of these like failure modes like long context and long horizon, context stuffing, right? Like all these things can be mitigated with all these other methods.
I think we've looked at also like just with the limited context windows have gotten pretty large nowadays. Like we've hit 1 million, but as you get multiple long running agents that are consuming a lot of that,
Yeah.
like things like compaction or like with memory, and now we've really streaming, where like we can analyze some of these memory patterns and try to like derive some insights. Um, Definitely like would love to hear more about where you think some of this is going and how we can improve that continuous like chain of thought as some of these flows get longer and longer.
Yeah, I mentioned it earlier. One of them is having Devin create other Devins, or when you generate like sub agents, the sub agents are kind of like a tool call of another agent that has a specific outcome too. So all these things are creating net new trajectories that like link to
Mm,
the main agent,
yeah.
or the agent spawned other agents, and it's like
I see.
organizing the results there too. And like yeah, there's other methods though, like compaction, which I think removes like the thinking traces, or like different ways to summarize the actual message itself. Like there's actually kind of like a lot of technology that goes into that as well. But all these things kind of work together to keep track of like what is the actual task at hand and where are we right now. And it can go on forever. I just talked about earlier about like a 29-day agent, which is actually
Wow.
insane to think about. But even after a few hours, you're like definitely like out of your context window, right? There's a lot of things happen to make you keep your eye on the ball and focus on the outcome.
And we're improving a lot of these on the model layer as well, right? Whether it's context windows or core capabilities that we can harness on top of the core models. How are you thinking about like how much of this is truly model driven versus like building on top of the models and the primitives?
Well, whenever the model has a capability, we want to leverage it as much as possible. It's designed to do that, right? So, for example, I think Opus 4.6 was the first model that actually like took notes. Like it would generate a MD file to like keep track of what's going on. Yeah, we want to leverage that because that's what the model was trained for to use, right? And we also provide stuff on top of it if it does get a little bit off. And we provide a lot more, like yeah, again, like a lot of tools, a lot of data, so that we want to increase the probability that we can get things end to end done, right? And a lot of the things we were doing, like nobody else is doing yet. Like we talked about the UI testing and like the deploying Android or Windows, right? These things like nobody else is doing right now, but it does increase like the amount of end to end agents that can get to the very end, right? So we like to think of Devin as like it's a superset of all these other end to end agents where we're just getting a lot farther. And then if it gets a lot farther, you could probably deploy even more because you can just not think about interjecting and correcting and unblocking. You can always just keep launching agents until
Yeah.
your all the work is done, hopefully, right? But again, there's a problem with that. Like when we go to like big enterprises, their work is typically their backlog, and the net new stuff is like kind of like they're not like prepared to do a lot faster on the net new stuff. Surprisingly, startups though is a different story. Startups is like there's not a lot of tech debt. There's unlimited things they need to do. Like their roadmap is unlimited. They're competing with everybody else. So startups is probably where you're seeing that's like crazy, like sprint on like token maxing or just moving really fast. So that has been a really interesting insight as well.
Yeah, in fact, actually, this week I was at OpenAI Frontiers Forum, right? And they were saying how, typically an engineer was maybe publishing 5 PRs a week, and that was like maybe you're a P70 engineer, and now it's actually become 50 a week, right? And I have to think for your P99 engineer, that might be even more than that. And so coming back to something that you mentioned around Devin and being able to let's say finish tasks, like, what does actually the state of being done look like for Devin? Like, what success metrics do you look for that you're like, okay, this autonomous agent, it has finished this thing. I can now move on to something else.
Yeah, it's a great question. In fact, if there are multiple people working on a project, it's actually constrained by the person that is behind on like some sort of like overarching feature. I'll tell you like an example. Like for Windsurf 2.0, we were actually held back a week or two because one person was supposed to be doing auth, but then everybody else had finished like all the other features and they were moving fast.
Yeah.
And I can tell you another cool stat, which is we are moving roughly 700% faster in terms of the number of PRs that we're merging in the past 6 months alone, and we've only increased the headcount by like 10%. So it is working. Like obviously this jump in token spend across the board. Anthropic's revenue is like like you can see it right in the revenue.
Yep.
And we haven't reported ours yet, but it's also a similar trend. But like that jump is because of like the number of things you can do end to end and like the ability to just like keep stacking things. And yeah, like people CFOs are calling me now They're like, hey, like we've already used our budget, and like you guys just signed last month. So this is happening now.
I mean, this is probably the top question, right, for CFOs these days is, how do we even, or how should they think about, like, for example, forecasting, right? And this is maybe less of a technical question, more on how do you, talk with CXOs about budgeting and headcount?
Yeah. Well, first of all, the thing we can do is optimize for costs today. Like you don't need to fly a private jet to from San Francisco to San Jose, right? Like you just don't have to. So like basically you should think about what's the best model for the job, what's the most efficient model for the job. And Devon is actually uniquely positioned where it can use multi models from different companies as well. We might be the last company that can do that, right? And that it gives us an advantage to like really think about is this the most efficient model? And we can actually do different modes of like this is the cheapest, like a cheaper mode versus like the max mode, right? We're thinking about the branding around this. And then for open source, for our own in-house models, for task specific models too, we are optimizing on cost too. So we've built our own agentic search model. We built our own bug checking model as well. And then these are like very optimized, very cheap models to run that we can serve to the customers for free. And we have our own coding models as well. Again, we're serving those for free as well. I don't know how long that's going to last, but like we want a viable alternative so that if again CFOs are like, I got to turn this off, we can still be like, well, hey, we have some alternatives.
So, what are some of the success metrics that you really look at, like in terms of optimizing cost or latency for some of your customers? Like, would you try to get faster iterations out there, or just a better like end-to-end result for customers? Like, how do you balance some of these things in terms of cost management?
The main thing is how do they feel about ROI, right? Is ROI a project that would have cost $100 million and we just did it for like a couple million? Is that worth it to you? Because you're about to spend a couple million like in this month, right? And that would have taken maybe 3 years. So like the time horizon, divided by the number of months, it's compressed to 1 month, but like it still like was worth it. The ROI is definitely there. And then it also becomes what is the value of time for you, right? Because if you think about a project, it's like it's budget, it's headcount, and it's time. Right now, you are in full control of the time now. You didn't have that before, but that's going to explode the budget, and you could compress the headcount as well. But this is like the conversation is like, how do you prove? How do you make the decision you're okay with this or not? And most organizations are not okay with that. So there are other ROI metrics. There is like velocity of like the amount of PRs and merge PRs and tickets that you're burning through, backlog that you're burning through. So that part is like stuff we're figuring out with them as well. But we are seeing customers take projects and give it a token budget.
Hmm.
Like this was not a thing like just a few months ago, right? So they're actually saying like for this project, here's the number of tokens we've allocated to it, and like if you hit that number, you can't use like Opus anymore or like GPT 5.5,
Oh, wow.
right? Like
Yeah.
it's like you have to use the cheaper models after that.
Yeah.
So that's like it's like starting to happen now as well.
And I think a question probably would be how do you demonstrate that ROI directly to customers? Like, are you thinking more case studies or like real world like scenarios to demonstrate this, or have AI like FDEs deployed like in these companies to show them using like pilots? Like, how do you really build out that study so that the like CISO or the CFO is able to purchase this?
I think a lot of this is based off of what their budget was for the previous year and how much they thought each of these projects were going to cost. Because that's completely all reset now. It's kind of like going to a sprint team and being like, how many points is this? Like that whole system doesn't make any sense either. Like story points, right? So it's like when you talk to CFOs, you have to look at some benchmark that they had priced before as one of the examples. So when you go into, and actually the best thing to do with a, like if you're going net new into a customer is saying, what are the most expensive projects? Like what is the thing that's going to take the longest? And then the forward deployed engineers can go in and actually do it much faster and much cheaper. And that's a great way to show ROI, right? It is no longer, I mean, like with us, it's like because it's so complex, you have to set up a bunch of tools and give it access to data. You do need to like pick something that is like beefy. Whereas like if you're like a Claude Code, it's like, oh, everyone's just gonna install it. Okay, great. Like it's a very different like motion. We want to really get deeply involved with the customer and really get attached to their outcomes. So we want to say we sell outcomes, we don't really sell dev tools. But that is truly the motion that we have.
That makes sense. And I mean, especially, from a CTO buyer perspective, that's really compelling. Obviously, now I'm kind of thinking on the sort of security side, right? With agents now being sort of new actors within like a company system, how do you draw the boundaries, right? Is it like CI pipelines? Is it by like repos? Is it by jobs? Right. And I'm just thinking like, you might want to apply like different guardrails to each environment so teams can move fast, but also like your CISO doesn't freak out.
Yeah, and this is where having an isolated instance is actually really beneficial. In this isolated sandbox and VM, it can't really do anything if you don't give it access. So if you only give it access to write code on the repo, the only thing it can do is give you a PR. But then you might say, hey, I wanted to access our production systems and I wanted to modify data. Then there's other failure modes, right? There's like destructive modes. There's things that you can prevent the agent from doing, but we actually don't recommend doing that. We do recommend for like testing purposes. You can like deploy the app in the environment and then provide it with data that is dummy data. But like we would never say like actually try to log in to the actual system with admin and then go ham. Like that is not like something we'd like to recommend to our customers when we help them set things up. And by the way, when people try to build this themselves, they forget that part. Like they might build their own VMs and sandboxes, and it's like their account, and they log in, like the agent's logging in, has access to what they have access to, and it could do something pretty bad. So like this is why like again the isolated VM does seem to be like the right mode to scale to like thousands of developers in an organization.
I think the isolation is definitely important, but you talked about access as well. And so, how do you make sure that as you start getting more and more autonomous agents, that the agent's task at hand is properly scoped to what the actual purpose of that agent is doing? Because that's definitely another vector where they can start getting a lot of unauthorized or elevated access.
Yeah, for sure. And like when you again, when you connect like a database, let's say you don't want to give it like edit access to the database, right? You heard stories of people's databases getting wiped by the agent.
Yeah,
But when
that
you
happened with AWS, right?
yeah, and you when you set up these devons, like you are like very specifically giving the right access to it. And like again, we help you set it up. We give you best practices about this too. And
Like
like
inside the app itself or with FDEs?
the FDEs are the ones
Yeah,
that usually go and help
gotcha.
the customers do this.
Yeah, and that's actually a trend we're seeing more often, especially across enterprise, customers who are deploying these autonomous agents or remote agents for the first time. So maybe tell us kind of what prompted you to bring in FDEs, and also how did these FDEs typically work with your customers?
Yeah, I can tell you the whole story. Like, it's funny, like, I think Palantir was the first to come
Yeah.
up with the concept, but for us, when we were, maybe this is like 3 years ago now, like we only like 10 or 12 people on the team. We had to go into the customers to try to make them understand how to use these tools. This is like the first time AI is like even a thing, and we realized like if you just try to like let them use it, they're not going to use it. Like even if you gave them this magic solution to all your life's problems, only like 15-20% of the people would use it, and that's bad. So then we started discovering like, wait, all right, how about we just like go through some training sessions, go through adoption metrics. We try to go through like some of the top developers and have them teach it to the other developers. Like we just went through all these methods, and we
Mhm.
saw like adoption rate just spike up, and then we're like, okay, like this is something we need to repeat. So as we hire like a sales team, we actually were like saying, are these solution engineers, solution architects, sales engineers? And we said, wait, no, they're going in there and they're like getting everybody on their feet and teaching them how to use it and making sure they're successful. And then we call them deployed engineers at the very, very beginning. So I think we might have been like the second company, at least after Palantir, to call them deployed engineers.
Yeah,
Someone's gonna like write on my Twitter that I'm wrong, but like
that's
that's
okay.
at least that's how we felt
Yeah.
like 2.5 years ago or so.
Gotcha. Well, I mean, certainly 2.5 years ago, I don't even think anyone was really thinking about remote agents, right? It was still very much, I think someone was saying like tab autocomplete code, right?
That's
So it's
right.
just been crazy, how much we've changed. And so now kind of moving away from, how the different like learning loops work for Devin, maybe let's dive into some of the product design choices between Windsurf and Devin. So maybe starting off with, where do you set the autonomy dial for Devon? Like, and how do most customers go about configuring that?
A lot of things, a lot of the outcomes of Devon is like a PR. So when you give a task to Devon, you expect to come back with something that's done. So what I mentioned before, like Playbooks is probably the number one mode for this because you will have very common things that the organization has to do, and you can tell what is the outcome that you want from Devon, and then you can then scale that to the organization, let everybody know this is the playbook. even simple things for like I mentioned, like what's going on with this customer. We do have like a customer playbook. Like you just run the playbook, say the customer name, and it just like tells you everything you need to know. So even that is something that's very predictable, even though it's not a PR, but it's
Mhm.
like something the agent knows what it's supposed to do. Now with Windsurf, it's a little different because you are interacting with the agent most of the time. And this is in the old days, I guess. Now that we have Windsurf 2.0, you're like running a lot of end-to-end tasks now.
Yeah.
But like in the old days, you're like actually going back and forth with the agent because you don't know, or the agent doesn't know, like for example, what design choices you prefer. You might be saying like, actually, I don't like that color, change it to this, or like I think that button's too big. There's all these things that you want to go back and forth with the agent, or like even the experience is slow or something doesn't work. That is something you would work with the agent, but it doesn't have like what Devin has, which is like Devin will actually go and try it, see if it works. It'll click around, and if it doesn't work, it'll like try to fix it. So like Devin has more of this like self feedback, verification loop, fixing loop that Windsurf doesn't have because it's local.
I see. And so actually that kind of begs the question, when would you use Windsurf then? Because it sounds like Devon is a superset of all of Windsurf's capabilities, including even Windsurf 2.0 with that self-learning loop.
So there are things that you will want to go back and forth on. Like maybe it is like trying out different ideas, and the outcome is not like a PR. You're like, actually, I need a plan, what we're gonna do together, break it down into different tickets, and I want to see what things look like first, and then maybe you do hand that off to a Devin as well. So there are ways to use Windsurf locally and then hand it off to an agent in the cloud as well. So I think this whole concept of using an IDE is going away. There will probably be no IDEs after this year. It'll just be agent management systems
I
and
see.
then
Will it
agent
look like a
orchestrators.
terminal? What do you
Um,
think?
I think it'll be like what we're doing with Windsurf 2.0, which is like a Kanban board of agents and what state they're in, and being able to manage them in the different states. So, for example, if an agent gets blocked and it doesn't know what to do next, that is a state that you can just like focus on. Like you might put a bunch of agents in the morning, you go get lunch, and you're like, oh, I'm gonna go unblock some agents before I get lunch, and you just like open those agents up, help them out, and then go to lunch, go get lunch, and come back, right? So that's kind of like what it's gonna be like going forward.
Wow, that's a very powerful vision.
I think moving more towards some of the product strategy areas, like if you were to balance things around reliability, traceability, and autonomy, which are the ones that you would really balance for Devin?
Yeah, when we go to talk to enterprises, like auditability and traceability is a huge thing because right now agents are going ham, creating PRs everywhere. So it is actually important for an organization wide, like admin slash being able to see where each agent got launched from, who launched it. So every PR that happens, where did it come from? What was the session that set it off? Because something could break downstream, and then you need to know why, and you need to know like who is at fault, right? So all of that is actually in the way we've set up the Devon platform. Everything is like traceable to who launched the agent and what happened in that session.
Yeah, maybe piggybacking off of what Richard just said around reliability. I think the most important thing, especially for enterprises, right? Let's take the UX fix loop, for example. I mean, that's a lot of trust because essentially, then, if we were to, onboard Devin for all of our UX loop issues, it would be out to our over 6 million consumer users across all of our different service areas. How do you earn trust with engineering, right? Is it like, what metrics matter most? Is it plan, quality? Is it, for example, the, narrative of intent? Like, maybe walk us through, like, how do you convince engineers from, like, I don't know about this, because that's literally the conversation I'm probably going to have with my engineers when I tell them about Devon, to, maybe, or even like resounding yes.
I think you got to set that success, right? And maybe it's a very long list of like, what would this agent need to do that you would be comfortable with, and then put it on that success criteria. And then the agent will just like go and prove it. And the other thing is like reviewing code right now. So as you have like 100x more PRs, probably, there's a lot of like bottlenecks now in reviewing. And we've rolled out a whole bunch of features about before you submit a PR, or like, for example, if you're working locally, we have this like bug checking model that you can run, and then after you get into a PR, we have a product called Devin Review. And Devin Review actually batches the features up to look at the file diffs versus like alphabetical file.
Oh,
And
yeah.
we also flag net new things that engineers should know. So if there's a very major architectural change, we
Mhm.
flag that in Devin Review.
Oh,
So as long the engineer is like not just like throwing slop in
yeah.
100% of the time. So that
How does it get that context?
it runs through there's like a very deep
Yeah.
analysis, and that's why it is like kind of expensive, as Anthropic has their own like review system, but it is like a lot of stuff going behind the scenes to be very thorough and pass that to the models and coming back. And we actually use multiple models for review as well. But going back to your question about trust, right? Like eventually we're going to be in a world of like we don't even have to review code, perhaps. Maybe that's like only like 9 months away. And like that's a big leap of trust,
Yeah.
of faith for trust. So getting to there is just demonstrating that you can catch all these failure modes and all these bugs and all these issues during the review process, but also the success criteria. If it's demonstrating its ability to complete all the success criteria and find all the bugs, and being able to like actually just like you just click and let things go through review, that's probably the world we're going to end up in, where it just happens end to end, even more to the end. And that's how, like, again, the trust is built through that whole flow.
So I think a lot of this you can really control on the Devon layer, but for customers that may have more legacy repos, or they like have weaker testing and their environments overall just aren't as safe or secure, how would you treat those kind of situations? Like, would you still have Devon go and focus on autonomy, or would you slow down and try to work around the environment?
I mean, this is a major like bulk of the work that we do now, is modernizing a lot of the very old enterprises out there. So we look at their code base. We actually can increase the code coverage, like just using Devon. So just like making it more robust in the testing for how it's set up. And then when you modernize it, those same test cases should pass if you convert it to a different language, or you migrate only pieces of it out, or if you're converting like a monolith code base to like a microservice, like agent ready code base. So all these things are part of the process in the beginning for these large enterprises. They have all these really old code bases. I mean, like mainframe and COBOL code is still very common,
Yeah.
surprisingly, even to this day. And I'm actually wondering if,
Well,
like, in a
especially
year or
within
two.
financial services.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Really, any company that's older than like 50 years, 30 to 50 years, like there's all this mainframe code they can't get rid of, and they're all retiring too, all those engineers. So they're like panicking right now. But what my point is, like, this whole effort to modernize code, and I think that's like step one. Like, you don't really want to be holding on to that old code and not being able to be iterative and put agents on it and have AI really benefit. It is all about getting that modernized first.
Yeah, I feel like you're kind of saying a lot of things that are certainly top of mind for me, right? Which is, we're actually going through that ourselves right now. In fact, we recently published a blog this time using actually cursor agents, but certainly, we started to go in, kind of set up like the test plan, right? Set up the success criteria ourselves manually. But I think, with what you're describing here, it could be a lot more automated.
That's right. And yeah, I think this is why we also send our deployed engineers. Like, a lot of these legacy companies, like they don't know how much that these tools can do. So we want to have people boots on the ground, plug things in, and get them started with their playbooks. Like, this is something they should. This is not something everyone wants to drop what they're doing and work on. So you want them to just like kind of give all their toil and all the projects that like just need to get done, and then throw it at agents and rip through. Right.
And one of the things that I think still is generally like one of the long poles or blocking is PR reviews, like for some of the outputs that a coding agent would create. And of course, like both Devon and also Cloud, we've released like code review tools that customers can call. Um, how has the overall like adoption been around these things, and how do you like expect? I think something you said very interesting, which is long term, that we may not need these PR reviews anymore. Like, how do you get to that state from like where we are today, where a human might still want to go and do that, or and eventually like probably use one of these like automated PR tools? Like, help me walk through like we've talked about a lot of these different things, but how do you see us getting toward that vision?
So I think step one is the agent has to prove the work is done. So right now, like, Devin can send you a screen recording. It could show you all the test cases passed. It could even show you like, here's some sample queries. The data is the same. That is like kind of step one. The agent has to have some method to prove that all the work it did is correct, and we sometimes even have like a report, which is really cool. It's like, who wrote this whole thing.
Yeah.
Um, but then the second thing is going to be like maybe 6 months down the line from now, the number of PR reviews that didn't have any changes. I think the percentage, right? And that percentage might be like, I don't know, 60% today or something. And then in a month later, it's like 70%. And then this is why I'm saying like 9 months. It's like maybe 9 months from now, it's like 90% of all PRs did not need any like any corrections at all. And again, when we get to some threshold, maybe it's 95, maybe it's 99%, most likely people are just gonna let things through. And maybe they're doing it already, right? But that's why we created Devin Review so that at least we can inform you of the important changes and the things we're spotting. And eventually, like maybe that's not important anymore either, right? Maybe it's like maybe the code doesn't matter anymore in the future. You're just thinking about like, here's the product spec, I'm just modifying the product spec, and you don't even know what's going on underneath. And that's what happened with like assembly and other, layers of abstraction, right? We keep moving up. So who knows? This is where we're at.
And you just see the business outcomes or the metrics that
Mhm.
show that it's actually working.
That's right.
Less incident reports, less customer bugs, things like that.
That's right. But as you can see in the last couple of weeks, the last couple of months, you can use these tools to find all these vulnerabilities and security issues too. So maybe it's just going to be a constant battle. I mean, that means it's even more important to use AI to like plug things in, right?
Absolutely.
And so maybe let's kind of make this real, right? And let's talk about kind of maybe two very different scenarios. One scenario in which it was a win scenario, and then the other one maybe where it was a miss, right? And so maybe starting with the win, tell me about maybe an example with a customer where Devin worked out way better than you had expected. What was like the hidden enabler?
Again, oh, here's an example. Like in Brazil, they changed their kind of like citizen identifiers, like kind of their social security equivalent. They made it alphanumeric. They changed the number of digits it was, and all these banks had to like convert all their identifiers into this new column, and they only had like I believe it was like 15 months, 12 to 15 months to do it, and they were panicking. They're like, there's no way they can get this done. This is like so many dependencies on all this data, right? But when you have these agents that can check for these dependencies and can check like could verify like, hey, like it did this column translate over? Is this tied to these other databases? When you set that part up, there is success because you can actually be comfortable with all the evidence that it worked, right? And so we did. I think that project only took like 6 to 8 weeks instead
Oh,
of a year, and that was just like proof that okay, these agents are probably working. They're pretty good. Um, in terms of failure modes, I mean, the funny thing is when there is a failure, we usually build a new feature or add on some technology to kind of like stop it. Like for example, like some of these code bases can get really big. Like you're thinking like probably gigabytes big. I think we've met the first company with like a terabyte size repo.
mm,
So like these kind of things are like things
wow.
that break things, but then
Yeah.
we in turn then have to like create the technology to support it. So that anything like that we've usually gotten around to build.
And I think for some of these failure modes, you can usually target it using better user experience or better tooling or better guardrails. How do you usually take a look at like what are some best ways to address these failure modes?
Oh, there's so many types of failure modes is the thing. Like maybe it is like long running tasks. Like how do we fix that? And then we talked about like compaction, summarization, or maybe the models are getting better at taking nodes. Like I think there's just always going to be things that we run into, but eventually some technology comes out or something we develop overcomes it, and then you'll probably see like all these other managed sandbox kind of solutions come up with the same thing. I'll give you like one very clear example, which is like, oh, I want to create managed sandboxes too. I'm gonna create it in this data center. And then whoops, I ran out of space. Like that's a very common mode that a lot of our customers run into. So then for us, it's like, how do we make it like so elastic that you'll never run out of space,
Mhm.
right? So like that's like part of the work that we've done. We've done this for like 2 years now. Like everybody else is kind of just in it for the last couple months, right? So we're like really in it deep with the infrastructure part.
Yeah, and that's actually some really hard stuff behind the scenes because then essentially you're gonna have to gather capacity yourself and but present that seamlessly to or showcase like the true elasticity, right, of what the customer could have.
Yeah, and like the state is like persisted too. So like if you have to jump back in, you can. If somebody else wants to hop into the conversation as well, with that VM, you can. So there's all and then you can spin things up and down, like, immediately. So it's like, I know everyone else is, like, thinking about this stuff, but, like, yeah, they're still playing catch up, I'd say, relative to where Devin is today.
So maybe to kind of wrapping up this segment, like walk us through the typical Devon loop, right? Starting with the PR. What is it doing? What is a human, or if either the human is even engaging?
Yeah, I mean, it starts with some sort of task. And the task can be very broad or very specific. Ideally, it's specific, or ideally, it's on a playbook, which is specific. So you ask Devin to do something, right? Maybe it's like, oh, it's a website change, very simple, or it's like our entire like database went down. Do some investigation. What's going on, right? Um, Either way, it should have some outcome that it knows what to do, and it will run through multiple ways to investigate and go through the different tools it has, look at the data to see if anything is inconsistent. And it's very good at that right now. I mean, all these things that it can do to like plan, investigate, and really know how to execute is very good nowadays. And then it has to actually execute. So what does execute mean? It could be writing code, like fixing code. It could also be like making, well, this is interesting. If it makes configurations on something else, that means it has some like admin controls. So that's usually not very common. But in theory, like you can give it access to do something to fix some admin thing, right? Or it might suggest the user to do that too. But whatever that thing is, the end result is usually a PR. So if it's writing code, it fixes something, it spots it, it will actually try to give you evidence that that is the reason why it broke and the before and after state. But that's what you get at the end of the day. It's like here's a PR, here's the proof that it worked on the environment that we spun up in, and go ahead and review it. And then we have Devin review right there that you can go to next.
And if you could introduce one primitive to make all of this loop even more reliable, what would that be?
Great question. Hmm. I mean, probably the limitations now is when you have a too generalized of a task, and if it's able to really nail down what you mean. And I think we talked a little about knowledge graphs before, and being able to like look at a very, very large organization and getting to the very specific thing it needs. Again, you can mitigate this by creating playbooks and pointing to it, but I think that's the biggest problem now is like very generalized task for across a lot of data, a lot of different sources, and being able to figure out what to do. I think models need to get more smarter about that. So,
Is that something that you're also building out along with the FDEs to figure out where's the authoritative source of truth, like in the organization, who has a louder voice, which direction that you should steer? All of these things that model reasoning typically struggles with.
yeah, and this is why we're training the organizations to build playbooks and these knowledge entries is because like we want them to be very specific. Like if there's a test that they know is repeatable, it will always get done correctly, right? That's what we want to get to. And if you don't do that work, meaning like you just plug in the data and your hands off, it'll work if it's like a startup, right? But if it's a 50,000 developer org, well, boy, like you gotta really you gotta be very careful about like how you set it up. And there's again other ways to mitigate it. You can create different orgs that have their own sets of data. You can create playbooks. You can create things that like even in Deep Wiki, which is the documentation that we provide when you plug in the code base, there are ways to link the code bases together. So if there's a dependency on something change, that is like noted in DeepWiki as well. So all these things like you want to just be very robust when you plug things in. And again, organizations are big. We had one of the banks had 300,000 repos that we documented with DeepWiki. So like the scale that we're operating in is actually crazy. Probably not very like well known for like maybe some startups or like newer companies because 50 years, 100 years of stuff being created is it just lags or it just stays behind, right? So that is the type of customer we're dealing with.
Wow, that's incredible. From, I mean, everything that you're mentioning, from 300,000 right repos to monoliths to mainframes, even Cobalt. Like, I mean, this is actually now you're entering real engineering problems versus, I think, prototyping, and that's actually where it gets really exciting. So looking forward here, right, in the next 12 to 24 months, what part of the agentic coding stack do you think is just going to disappear?
I think reviewing,
Yeah.
yeah, I think, or at least there will be so much trust in the review that people will probably not look at it. I'll tell you an example. Like just 7 months ago, people were still looking at the code, and I don't think anybody's actually looking at the code anymore. So like and I didn't think that was ever going to happen, but we are already at that state today. So then the next, I keep talking about layers of abstraction, but the next kind of like level is like we just trust that the agent did the right thing. Whether or not that increases the amount of security incidents or not, that's another question. But we will always provide tools to, like, of course, make the customer feel more comfortable that things are done.
And so in that world, like, what do you think is going to become the new standard primitive?
Like, what do you mean by that, actually?
Yeah, so you mentioned, reviews are going to go away. So what's going to stay as part of the agentic coding stack?
Probably you will have to have the ability to prove something is done. And there are tools today that do it, but there are probably better tools in the future to do it.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing that as well, even internally in Anthropic, right? And so we're definitely heading toward that direction. Completely agree with that. And the hardest thing is actually tying that back to your original business outcome or what you were trying to get out of the PR. And I think that's definitely a challenge that a lot of people are still figuring out.
And maybe this one is a selfish question for me. If you're advising a CTO on what's the best rollout plan for, Devon and Devon class sort of problems, what's the first 30 days look like?
It is identifying the best, maybe like 3 to 5 use cases, and then trying to do it together for either all five, or if they're too big, maybe one or two, and then proving that out, and then staging the instance to work with the next few use cases. Once you really prove out that it can do these use cases, then the next step is like rolling out to the team, and like in that month, you're like kind of doing all those things, like getting the team up to date how to use it, rolling out those use cases. You might actually add some use cases for everybody else if they're not part of that loop, but that is essentially it. It's like we want to again deliver the outcomes. Like the tool can we you kind of assume like you're rolling out agents, right? You're not like you don't want to think like you're rolling out specific tools to do specific types of work. You're actually thinking about how can these agents be applied to a broad set of problems within the organization, and can I really show it to them by actually delivering those outcomes and solutions. So I think that's kind of like the difference of how we're operating with like traditional SaaS. Because traditional SaaS, you're probably like, oh, does it have autocomplete? Great. Like, but no, it's like now it's like we're actually solving these major problems for you.
So that's actually one of my favorite closing questions for our builders here, which is if you could take the next 2 months off to build anything that you want to build, doesn't have to be necessarily Devon or windsurf, could be though. What would you build?
I mean, I would probably build something that is all the taking away all the not useless, but like the tedious stuff of life. um, but that's kind of like I just need like an EA, like that could be it.
Do you
But
have one?
I,
Actually,
I
very
actually don't.
curious.
The reason why is because like I don't know if the audience knows, but I'm like traveling to like a new region almost every other week,
Yeah.
and every time I go to the new region, then there's like a set of folks that are setting up the schedule and the meetings and the customer interactions. So like the EA is like a new person every week, it seems.
Wow.
But back to your question of like, yeah, if I could build anything, I mean, I would hope it's maybe the other most busy thing in my life is like the kids. So if I could build something like that can help them learn, or like keep them, yeah, like make them smarter somehow, right? And maybe that is something that's like software related or media related, or it could be like a game. That's probably something I'd build over the next 2 months, because I do feel like that's like the one thing that's very challenging now is
Yeah.
like keeping the kids entertained, but also like making them smarter, and yeah, being present for them. So hopefully it's like a cool thing I can build for that. Now you
Yeah.
like kind of motivated me to
Now I'd
try
love
to
to
build
see
this.
the
Yeah.
prototype. Do you even think it's gonna exist in physical form?
It could. I was
Yeah.
thinking about that too. I was like, is this a robotics thing? But that might be harder. I don't have like a vibe robotics coder thing. So not yet, maybe
Well,
it's coming up.
there's LLMs out there like Skilled AI that are, especially made for robots.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I typically encounter talking to enterprise customers is that the failure mode that we're talking about. These agents are very powerful, but a lot of our regulated customers and enterprises, they like banks have 3 to 6 month DPAs. Like a lot of these security and regulatory requirements. I think building stuff outside of this, like artifacts that can help better navigate some of the organizational complexity and work with FDEs, but really like unhobble the power of these agents in organizations that have a lot of the red tape and failure modes. I think that's definitely something that I'd love to look at and try to build.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's funny when you look globally, there's different people out of date. If you look at Bay Area, it's like really up to date. You know exactly what happened in the last hour. Everybody knows what happened. But then you start traveling around, even like Midwest, East Coast, like they like probably don't even know the difference between like Sonnet and Opus. They're like, which one do I select? This one seems more expensive. So I think like another thing is, and that by the way contributes to what you're talking about with like the red tape, and like some places only want on prem, right? They won't even allow code to exfiltrate or like exit their region, right? So these are all problems that we're dealing with as well. And yeah, and like these are things that are top of mind to us too. How do we like get around that and help make them successful?
Yeah, wow. I feel like we covered so much in this episode, and definitely I think I'm gonna go back to Devin for the UX loop that you just talked about. I'm gonna try it this afternoon. So
Awesome. Great.
yeah, thanks so much for coming to our studio, Jeff, and thank you, Richard, for being our guest co-host today.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.